Well, good morning, church. It's good to see everybody here. We're continuing with our sermon series on rescue. And really what we're doing through this sermon series is we're going through and we're talking about sin and our need for rescue from sin. Now, it's important to do this because remember that overall what we want to accomplish this year is we want to be people who are more joyful, more full of worship, who experience the joy of the Lord in the things that we do and give Him honor and praise. And really what we're doing is we're wanting to enter more fully into communion with God, more fully into the presence of God where there is joy and where God can be praised and glorified. And from the biblical perspective, what keeps us out of the garden, what keeps us out of the presence of God is sin. And so we need to deal with that sin if we're going to be more joyful people, more worshipful people. And so we were looking at this sermon series and we're dealing with kind of the overall picture of the story of sin in the garden. And last week we covered this part of the story in Genesis chapter 3 verse 1 where it said, did God actually say, you shall not eat of any tree in the garden? We talked about questions. And remember that as we talked about questions, we talked about a question asks why, and it's not necessarily a bad thing to question. In fact, questions can bring us closer to God, or questions can bring us farther away from God. And really a question is just rooted in our finiteness. We don't have all the information. We don't have all the answers. There's no way that we can know everything. And so we have to ask questions. So there's nothing wrong with a question, but it can become something not good. And the way that it becomes something not good is our topic today. We're talking about doubt. And remember that in the story, it says that the serpent said in verse 4 to the woman, you will not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. So what Satan does is he brings doubt into the picture. You see, there's a question, and that question asks why. But doubt is skeptical about the answer to the question. You see what I'm saying? There's a difference between the question and doubt. The question just says, why is this the case? But then when the answer that God has is because He loves us, when we are skeptical of that answer and we accept Satan's explanation instead, we've entered into doubt, and that's when we experience problems. And so today we want to look at something that's a parallel situation to the idea of doubt in the garden. And this parallel situation or likely or parallel situation is found in Matthew chapter 1 verse 18. Now what's interesting here is in this passage that we're going to read today in 18 verse 25, we're looking at the birth of Jesus, but we're looking at it from the standpoint of Joseph. Now, a lot of times when we look at the birth of Jesus, we can look at it in terms of the Messiahship, we can look at it in terms of Mary, but we don't often look at it in terms of Joseph, which is kind of interesting. And I think that when we do, we see a real struggle that goes on here. In Matthew chapter 1 verse 18, it says, now the birth of Jesus Christ took place in this way. When His mother Mary had been betrothed to Joseph, before they came together, she was found to be with child from the Holy Spirit. Now, the thing that's interesting to me about the difference between Mary's experience of this situation and Joseph's is interesting because here's the thing, Mary has to deal with a lot here. She's going to deal with a lot of social stigma. She's got to deal with all kinds of problems. She gets visited by the angel of the Lord, and he says, you're going to be, he says, you're most highly favored. You're not married, but you're going to be pregnant. In that culture, that's not really the definition of being highly favored, right? That's and what's interesting is when the angel appears to her and says this, when he says you're going to be most highly favored, even before he spits out the fact that she's going to be pregnant, he just shows up and says you're going to be most highly favored. It says that she was fearful. When an angel shows up and says you've got God's favor, the appropriate response is to be afraid, right? Because when you look at the Bible and you see the people that had the favor of God, sometimes things went roughly for them. And so she knows what's what. She's a smart girl. She knows what's what. And God shows up and says, hey, or the angel of the Lord shows up and says, hey, you're going to be highly favored. She's like, whoa, Do I want this? But, the thing is, she accepts it with faith. Now, here's the difference I see between Mary's experience of this situation and Joseph. Is Mary knows she's still a virgin. You know what I'm saying? Like she knows. She's positive that this is from the Lord. She knows. Joseph has to take her word for it. Now, here's the thing. It's one thing to be visited by an angel and told, you're going to be with child even though you're a virgin. That's strange, right? That's weird, but you can say, okay, well, I know that this is the case. But if you're in Joseph's shoes, it's a different situation. This is the most unlikely story of all time. You know what I'm saying? Like this is not the kind of story you go, oh, really? That makes sense. And so Joseph has a difficult thing in front of him. He's got a difficult situation. But he's a righteous man. In verse 19 it says, and her husband Joseph, being a just man, being a righteous man, and unwilling to put her to shame, resolved to divorce her quietly. You see, being betrothed in that day and age was kind of like being married. And it required a divorce, and so he was going to do this quietly. He wasn't going to make a big deal out of it. He wasn't going to put her to shame. He wasn't going to have her stoned for adultery. He wasn't going to do any of those kinds of things. But here's the thing. There's doubt, right? There's doubt. Is this story true? In verse 20 it says, but as he considered these things, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, Joseph, son of David, do not fear to take Mary as your wife, for that which is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. So now he's got a dream that's saying, you should know that this is from the Holy Spirit. Now here's the problem that I see. So when Russia invaded Ukraine, I spent the evening looking at videos and trying to find out what was happening. And then that night I fell asleep. And in my dreams, I was fighting a war. Have you guys ever had this experience? Whatever you're doing, whatever you're talking about, whatever you're watching before you fall asleep, you have a dream that has to do with that? I didn't take from that dream that I should go join the resistance. I didn't say to myself, hey, I've had this dream. This is from God. I see you guys later. I'm going to go fight for a while. Should Joseph, obviously there's a lot going on. He's probably full of maybe fear and maybe some betrayal and some hurt and a lot of things going on and some doubt. And he's got all this stuff going on. And clearly this would be weighing on him. And if he goes to sleep, should he take this dream? Is this from God? Or is this his subconscious? Should he say to himself, well, of course I dreamed this dream because that's what I was thinking of before I went to sleep. And I had Taco Bell, and you know how that is. Or should he say to himself, no, this is the word of the Lord. It can go either way, right? It's just a dream. But he has to determine, what does this dream actually mean? Does it mean that God's speaking to him and something crazy and wonderful is happening in his life? Or should he say, this is just a dream? It says that she will bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. What a wonderful thing. But only if you believe that this dream is something more than just your subconscious working out its problems. Verse 22, it says, all of this took place to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which means God with us. All of this turmoil and all of this difficulty and all of this doubt and all of this struggling and all of this wrestling, do you see it says this took place to fulfill what the Lord had spoken? All of this. In verse 24 it says, when Joseph woke from his sleep, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded him. He took his wife but knew her not until she had given birth to a son, and he called his name Jesus. We want to look at a few things today about doubt, and it's important to understand. We see in the garden a picture of doubt that is fulfilled, that's allowed to run its course, that's allowed to mature. And in this passage, we see a picture of doubt that is laid to rest. And in contrasting those two pictures, we want to look at, first of all, the cost of doubt, secondly, the answer to doubt, and finally, the victory over doubt. Because I think this is important for us as we deal with the issue of sin in our lives. If we can't get a hold of this, if we can't nip doubt in the bud, then we will struggle with sin our whole life. So first of all, let's look at the cost of doubt. So Adam and Eve, remember, were in the Garden of Eden, and they were in the presence of God, and because of doubt, because of doubting who God is, they're cast out of the garden, and there's no way back. Now, what's really fascinating about this description in the Bible is that it rings true. You've had this experience in your life, whether you realize it or not. You've had this experience. The experience is what things are versus what they mean. Because what they are, you can tell, right? You know, you have a house, it's a house. Your house burns down, you know what that is. You know that the house is burned down. But what does it mean? Does it mean that God hates you? Does it mean you should just give up? Does it mean you just can't have nice things? What does it mean? We had some friends of ours in Colorado, and the guy retired, and he built, with his own two hands, he built an amazing log cabin. And about 3 months after he finished it, the barbecue on the back porch exploded, and do you guys remember party lines? You know, they lived out in a rural area of town, and they had a party line, which means that when you picked up the phone, somebody else in your neighborhood might be talking on it. And so that happened. They had the house is on fire. The back of the house is exploded. It's on fire. And they pick up the phone, and somebody's on it, and they say, hey, we need the phone. Our house is on fire. And the person on the other end didn't believe them and wouldn't get off the phone. And their house burned to the ground. They lost everything. Does that mean that God hates you? Does that mean that God's against you? You see, the thing is, the thing happened. You can see the thing, but you can't see what the thing means. Our friend decided that what it meant was that he got a chance to fix all the things that he didn't like about the house that he built. And he said, this is fantastic. He said, I built it with this big open area on the top because I thought it would be neat. You could look down, and it's just wasted space, and I hated the fact that I had made that decision, and now I get to build it the right way. Fantastic. You see, not everybody reacts that way. One of the examples to this is when you look up in the sky and you see a rainbow. A rainbow is a rainbow. We know how it's caused. We know why it's there. We know, right? And most of us go, oh, look, a rainbow. Except that guy. Do you remember the double rainbow guy? Now, he was impressed with that double rainbow, wasn't he? But why? Why? In Genesis chapter 9, verse 12 and 13, it says, and God said, this is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. I have set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. We know what a rainbow is, but what does it mean? You understand what that passage is telling you is that rainbow in the sky is a sign to you, right? Are you one of every living creature? Are you part of all generations? Yeah, you're included in that. So basically, the rainbow, what it means is that it's a sign to you of God's covenant with the earth. Do you look at it that way? Do you look at a rainbow and say, man, that's a reminder that God has a covenant with me? That's a sign to me. Or is it just, oh, that's neat? You see, it turns out actually to be pretty important, this idea of what things mean versus what they are. You see, people can look at the same thing, they can look at the same events, they can look at the same problems or the same opportunities, the same blessings. They can look at these things and have a completely different reaction. I think I've shared with you before that there's some family members that we had that were in this huge tornado. And in fact, they were in a theater full of people when the tornado hit, and people around them died. That's how bad it was. The theater was completely destroyed, and people around them died. And the two of them were right there in the middle of this, hearing this go on, seeing it go on, and seeing the aftermath of it, and trying to help rescue people, and having to walk miles to the hospital because the other hospital in town was destroyed. And the interesting thing is that even though they were right next to each other, they had two completely different reactions. One of them had the reaction that, man, this proves to me that God is in control. That even if there's something where people are dying all around me, if God doesn't want me dead, then I won't be dead. And it was like he was bulletproof after that. I didn't take weird, wild, risk or anything, but the confidence that he had after that moment, that things were in the hands of God. The person right next to him was terrified after that moment. No one's in control of anything. At any moment, no matter how secure you feel, everything can fall apart around you. Same event, different interpretations of what it meant. You see, Adam and Eve are in the garden, and there's a prohibition against eating from this certain tree. And the question is, that's not up for debate. There's this tree, and we're not supposed to eat from it. We know this. We know that this is what's the situation. The question is, why? What does it mean? Is it a sign of God's love? Does God say, hey, don't mess with that, because if you do, you're going to regret it. Things are going to go poorly for you. Or is it a sign that God is trying to keep something good from you? Which is the case? You see, what doubt does is doubt doesn't ask the question. Doubt is skeptical of the answer for the question. And it's amazing what doubt can do. In fact, it's safe to say that there isn't anything in this world that's immune from doubt. Nothing in this world is immune from doubt. You know what? There are times when people's doubt becomes so ingrained, becomes so mature, is so productive in their life, and comes to such full bloom in their life, that they get to the point where they are terrified of everything. They can't go out of an elevator or go into an elevator. They can't go out of their house. They can't drive in a car. They can't, and the list goes on and on and on. In fact, I had a relative that we visited once when I was a kid, and when we visited her, she hadn't been off her porch in 8 years. Why? Because she didn't know what was out there. She could see the world, and her interpretation of the world isn't, wow, what a wonderful place to explore. It was, this is terrifying. Doubt can ruin everything in your life. In fact, it's true to say that doubt can make hell out of heaven. Doubt can make hell out of heaven. Hey, have you guys ever watched those, I don't know what it's called, I think it's called a slingshot or something. They have them at carnivals. There's two big towers, and there's some kind of bungee cords on them, and then there's a little capsule or chair thing in the middle. There's usually 2 spots, and they kind of crank that thing down like a big slingshot. You guys know what I'm talking about? And then they turn it loose, and it springs up. Have you guys ever seen that? What's really interesting is there's a camera on this thing that records people. And some people literally pass out from the terror. Probably that and the G-forces, right? They completely pass out. What's interesting is you'll see them screaming, ah, and then they'll pass out, and then they'll wake right back up, ah, And it's just over and over again. Like when they wake up, the chair is still there, and so they pass right back out again. Well, I was watching this one, and it was pretty funny because they're getting ready to launch these two people, and they're terrified, and especially the guy. It's a guy and a girl, and they're both completely terrified. And then right before they launch, the guy who's operating the ride says, "Hey, wait, adjust your seatbelt. It's way too loose, it's way too loose." And then they shoot him. What a terrible trick, huh? And it's funny because the girl was she kept it together, but when that happens, oh man, she lost it. Doubt can take something that's supposed to be enjoyable and turn it to something that's absolutely terrifying. And this is true in all different aspects of our life. Do you understand that doubt can turn what can be an enjoyable job or an enjoyable workplace into something that's just awful? Doubt can take a marriage and turn it into something absolutely devastating. I was really close to someone who had marriage, had kids, and then all of a sudden doubt crept into the marriage. And the question was, where is my wife? What is she doing? What's going on? And these questions ate him alive. The stomach cramped up. The sleep fled. Every moment of his life turned into hell. Doubt can even destroy your own perception of yourself and your value. When you look in the mirror, what do you see? You know what's really interesting to me is doubt can be immune to every form of help. How many celebrities chase validation from thousands and thousands of people and yet never are satisfied, always look in the mirror and doubt the value of what they see? The cost of doubt is truly dreadful. It takes us out of the garden. It takes us out of the joy of the presence of God. You see, what we don't understand is everybody says, I'd like to be closer to God. But the problem is that if you experience closeness to God and you have doubts about His love for you, that is not a period of joy for you. That closeness to God will not bring joy, it will bring terror. In fact, what's interesting about the Bible is that everybody who encounters even an angel of God is terrified to the point of passing out. Why? Because in every person there's enough doubt that it's terrifying to be in the presence, not just of God, but of one of His angels, one of His messengers. So, what is the answer to doubt? Let's look at that, the second point here. What's the answer to doubt? Adam and Eve have doubt, and they have doubt about the intentions of God. They have doubt about the love of God. And this is the most crippling form of doubt. You can doubt yourself, you can doubt your spouse, you can doubt your job, you can doubt the country, you can doubt the leadership, you can doubt, you can be subscribed to every form of conspiracy theory that exists. You can doubt everything. But the most crippling form of doubt is doubting the love of God. Because if you doubt the love of God, you're actually doubting the foundation, the existence of everything. You understand, right? Because if you doubt the love of God, you doubt the very nature of the creation that He's made. If God doesn't really love us, then how can we trust anything that's been made, anything that's been created? How do we trust the very foundations of reality and the way things work? Have you ever been in a situation where you're working on something at home and you strip something out and then you go to fix that and then another problem arises and you go to fix that and what do you say? What do you say? The world is against me. That's par for the course. That figures, right? That's the way the world. That's the way. Is that the way that reality is constituted to be against us? You see, what happens is when you doubt the love of God, you have reason to doubt everything in existence, even the way that reality is constituted. That the fabric of everything that's been created and everything that exists is actually opposed to our good and to our happiness and to our joy. It's the most crippling form of doubt. It makes us look at the whole world, including other people and including ourselves, with doubt. Why did God make me this way? Why am I the way I am? Why can I never change? Why can I never get things right? Why am I always like this? Has any of those thoughts ever gone through your mind? The Bible, what's fascinating, the Bible has a strange answer to this conundrum, and we see a little glimpse of it in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 21 through 23. It says, "For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, it pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe." Notice this, "For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom." God's all wise and everything, and we're like, I don't get it. Right? That's kind of what it's saying. God's set things up. He's super wise, super smart, super, like everything makes sense. It's all logical. It all goes together. And we're like, yeah, I don't know. So since that's the case, it's pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. For Jews demand signs and Greeks seek wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and folly to Gentiles. So here's what the Bible is saying, is that the answer to all of this problem is something that people say doesn't make any sense. So what I'm saying to you is that when you look at the situation, the fact that everything can be doubted, and in fact, everything usually is doubted, that the answer to that makes no sense. Let me explain. What he's saying is that it's the cross of Christ that is the answer to all this doubt. You see, there's a problem in the world, and the problem is that no matter how much what God tells us makes sense, we can always doubt it, right? How many of you ever were in a situation when you were a teenager that your parents told you not to do something, and you did it, and it didn't go very well? Anybody? Anybody ever in that situation? Did that ever happen to anyone else? Okay, probably it did, right? And the thing that happened is when that happened, you said to yourself, aha, my parents are wise, they care about me, and I will henceforth always obey them, right? How many of you that's what your reaction was? No, it wasn't your reaction. You said, well, maybe, but you know, they don't know everything. Right? And so you went off and you kept being weird. And you kept having problems. So here's the thing. That's what basically happens with God, is that everything, we doubt everything. And God says, look, here's my law. Here's what you should do if you want to have a good life. Look, I want to bless you. And in order for you to be blessed, this is the way I set up the world. So do things this way. And we're like, man, I hate that. I don't trust you. Now here's the thing, what God says is something really fascinating, is that He said, okay, well, if you're not going to trust all the wisdom and the knowledge and the fact that I made everything work and it works beautifully, and man, when you do things right, everything comes together and it's so beautiful and it's so wonderful, you don't trust any of that, let me do something that you can't ignore. Let me do something that will get your attention. Let me do something that when you question it, the deeper you go, you will not be able to wrap your head around it and you will not be able to dismiss it. I will die for you. I will die for you. Now try to make a conspiracy out of that. How in the world do you explain that away? How in the world do you say, well, but He didn't really love us. He wasn't really for us. He didn't really care for us. You see, the cross of Christ is fascinating because it places everything in a different light. It changes everything. I think about Joseph, and I think about the fact that he's being asked to believe something that's truly difficult to believe, and the only proof that he's given is a dream, something so easily doubted as to be unbelievable. And the question I think about is, throughout Joseph's life, did he have doubts about what's happening? This is the guy that's supposed to save our people from their sins. What does that look like? What does that mean? How do you save somebody from their sins? I understand that, maybe he thought he was the Messiah, but the Messiah was supposed to be a king. But a king can't save people from their sins. Really, a king can make things kind of nice, but there's only so much a king can do. How is this going to work? I can imagine Joseph laying awake at night thinking through these ramifications. And the interesting thing is we don't know how long Joseph lived. But most people, most scholars believe that by the time Jesus began his public ministry, Joseph was already dead. So he never even saw his ministry. And he certainly was dead by the crucifixion. But the thing is, even if Joseph was alive through the public ministry of Christ and alive at the crucifixion, like what did Joseph ever think to himself, or would he have thought, I married a woman who was unfaithful to me to have a son who was kind of crazy and was crucified as a traitor? It would have been easy to believe that. But then the other thing that you can believe is that God has shown His love for us in a way that the world has been waiting for its entire existence, and that changes and transforms the history of the world from this moment onward. You see, that's the nature of the cross, that if it's true, then it transforms everything. It transforms everything in the history of Israel, because all of a sudden, if the cross of Christ is true, then Israel's history looks completely different, right? That God gave them the law out of love, and that even though they were unable to keep it, God already knew that they would be unable to keep it, and so He was trying to show them and the world that it wasn't going to be dependent on them, that He was going to solve the problem Himself in a way that was so good and so glorious and so full of love that the world can't comprehend just how amazing and wonderful it is. That everything in their history was a setup to a salvation that's so great that it's ineffable. Everything in their past changes if this story is true. And not only that, but everything in the future changes if this story is true. Because the world is not directionless. That there is a moment in time where Jesus comes and He shows the love of God, and people believing that have the Spirit of God in them, and then the world starts heading towards something that, even though there's ups and downs, there's problems, there's difficulties, there's hang-ups, there's reversals, that in the end, that paradise is inaugurated. That all of us are playing a part in that. You wonder, you don't understand how wonderful things are if this is actually true. The thing that's fascinating to me is that we so often don't understand just how important our lives are. You're just a few degrees away from like a million people. Like, you know about a bunch of people and they know a bunch of people, and it doesn't take very long before you're at like a million people. Like, you have influence over those people, and then if you change those people's perceptions, if you change their life, then they change the people around them, and it doesn't take long before that's like a million people. And the thing is, you think, but are they going out and solving anything? You don't understand just how living a moral life. It's interesting that there's all kinds of things that have been happening in the news recently. There's an invasion that's going on, and apparently doesn't look like it's going to plan, and I've been reading some things that are fascinating. The Soviet Union, the communist system, created something that was supposed to be a utopia. But it was all externally enforced. And the result of that was a lot of corruption, that people basically just didn't care. My government doesn't care for me. The people at the top don't care for me. Well, I'm not going to care for them. And what ends up happening is we don't understand the extent to which each one of us in our choices in living a moral life actually leads to the glory of our world. You know what's really fascinating to me? I was doing some reading this week. In 25 years, from 1990 to 2015, the rate or the number of people living in extreme poverty in the world declined by more than half. You understand that the history of the world is the human population living in extreme poverty. That's the history of the world. And nothing happened like that ever in history. That in 20 years, the number of people living in extreme poverty dropped by more than half. It's never happened in the history of the world. You know the thing that leads to people living in extreme poverty? Sin. You see, what happens, why people live in extreme poverty is because nobody follows the rules. You never invest in anything because if you have anything, it'll be stolen. The people at the top, they're going to pilfer everything they can. The people at the bottom are going to spend their time avoiding the rules that lead to them being pilfered. And then you have a situation where extreme poverty arises. Now, that's a simplified way of looking at it, but at its heart, it's the truth. Do you understand that if the cross of Christ is true, then just living a life where you follow the righteousness of God, you love your neighbors, you love the people around them, you do your best to participate in what's happening in the world, that's far more powerful than you can possibly imagine. You see, everything gets transformed by the cross of Christ. All of Israel's history, the law and the prophets. Is the law something that's just a list of rules that are onerous and difficult to follow? Or is it a mark of God's love for you? Is the psalmist correct when he says, I love your law, O God? Its weight's greater than gold. It's worth more than silver. Is the psalmist correct about that? You see, if the cross of Christ is true, then the law is so sweet and so good because it shows us the glory and the righteousness of God. And even though we couldn't keep it, it's not something that leads to our death, but drives us to the cross of Christ where we find life. But not only does it change everything about Israel's story, it changes everything about your story. I was reading recently about a man who was in a car accident and lost his mother, his wife, and his daughter all in that car accident. He was the only one in the car that survived. And I was thinking about that and how I can't imagine anything worse than that. And I know that that's, in history, lots of people have gone through that. There's people going through that right now in the world. It's hard to imagine how difficult that would be. And the thing is that event is a reality for him, and he's lived with it for more than 20 years. But the question is not about the event. The question is what does that event mean? Does it mean he should just give up? Does it mean that God hates him? Does it mean that there is no God? Does it mean all those things? He actually wrote a book about dealing with loss that hundreds of thousands of people have purchased. Because after dealing with it for years and years and years, he came to realize that God had taught him some things that he never would have learned otherwise, that it was actually could be redeemed. We've talked many times about Nick Vujicic, I always mess up his name, who was born with no arms and no legs, and at 8 years old was so depressed that he tried to kill himself by drowning himself in the tub. But since he was basically all torso, his lungs meant that he could float, and he said he was so depressed because he realized he was so terrible and so useless that he couldn't even kill himself. Can you imagine an 8-year-old being in that position? And now if you go to his website, what you'll see is a picture of him smiling with his wife and his 4 kids, 2 boys and 2 girls. And the fact that he goes around the world talking to people who have physical limitations. And you know what? Does it matter that he has no arms and no legs and that he was like that from the time that he was born? The thing is that the people that he speaks to might be missing an arm or a leg or two legs, but he's missing all of them. And he can look at them and say, you know what, I can be missing these things, but there's a God who loves me, who's given me a great life. And the fact that he's worse off than everybody that he speaks to means that he has authority to speak into the position of their life. And he realizes what a gift that God has given him to be able to do that. You see, here's the thing. It doesn't really matter what's happened in your life. What matters is what you think about what's happened in your life. How do you interpret what's happened in your life? Do you see it as something that's a mark of God's love for you? Do you see it as proof, as evidence that God is able to overcome anything? That life with God, that God is so great, that life with Him, no matter what else you're missing in your life, if you have God, then you have more than enough. Is God, through your life, showing that in the dark place that you're at, that He's there? And is He showing that so that other people can see that? You see, what's fascinating is that just like Adam and Eve, Joseph had a choice. And by choosing to believe, by choosing trust over doubt, salvation was brought to all of us. And in your life, that can be true. You can be the pathway, the conduit of salvation to people by your belief. Let's look finally at the victory over doubt, because this is important, and we have no time. We're out of time. We're way past time. Shall we continue, though? Okay. In Philippians chapter 3, verse 7 through 9, it says, "But whatever gain I had, I counted as loss for the sake of Christ. Indeed, I count everything as loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord. For His sake I have suffered the loss of all things and count them as rubbish in order that I may gain Christ and be found in Him." The victory over doubt is when you can see your past, present, and future in light of the cross. Christianity insists on the centrality of the cross because in the light of that, everything is transformed. Everything that you might have been proud of before, some of those things might seem futile and failures, but everything that you thought was terrible, a lot of those things might look like victories. You see, everything changes in light of the cross. It changes the meaning of what's taken place. It might not change the events, but it changes what they mean. People make the mistake of thinking that living by faith is failing to see the world as it is. That is not true. And if you go through something difficult, if you go through something hard, it's going to hurt. Don't think that just because you're a Christian that things stop hurting. Don't think that because you become a Christian and you live by faith, all of a sudden nothing matters and nothing touches you and you don't even see the real world, you're not connected. You'll be just as connected to the real world. But what's fascinating is, even though it hurts, you'll see that that pain is redeemed. Living by faith is not failing to see the world as it is. Living by faith is trusting that God is shaping us with the world as it is. In Romans chapter 8, verse 13, it says, "For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live." If you start living in doubt, you will die. I guarantee that. Let me say that again. If you live in doubt, you will die. That is guaranteed. If you live in doubt, you will die. If you say, this doesn't matter, there isn't a God who loves me, all this is for nothing, you will die. But if you live according to the Spirit and you put to death those things of the flesh, you will live. Joseph made the choice. And we can make the choice to live every day in light of the cross, to see everything that comes our way in light of the cross, to see every choice that's before us in light of the cross, to become who the cross of Christ demands that we become, to put off the things that the cross of Christ demands be put off, and to accept the things that the cross of Christ demands that we accept. You see, that's victory, and you will find a victorious life at the foot of the cross. Well, how do we apply this very quickly? Well, believe in God's glory. You can't enter the promised land without trust. And so I encourage you this week to examine the areas of doubt that you have. This is super important. We can't just leave here and be the same people. I encourage you this week to look at the areas of your life that contain doubt. What do you doubt? What things have happened in your life, or where are the parts of your life that you don't quite trust that God is Lord of and that He's showing His love to you in? Belong to Him through the covenant and share in His glory. You know, God is making us competent of blessings. God is shaping us and making us competent of blessings. What do I mean by that? I mean this. You know, if I have a grandson and I have a son, that's kind of how it works. If I give my son the keys, it's not the same thing as giving my grandson the keys. My grandson he's not been formed and made competent of the car keys yet. He's got to go through a lot, and a lot of that's going to be pain and suffering and discipline and being grounded and all that kind of stuff. His dad was grounded a lot, and he will need to be grounded a lot, I can already tell. And all of that grounding is going to be to make him competent of blessings. Here's the thing. All of us say, God, why don't you bless us? But we doubt that God is having us go through the troubles and the trials of our lives so that we can be competent of those blessings. Don't just say, God bless me. Why aren't you blessing me? You must not love me. No. God is trying to make you competent of those blessings that you desire. And finally, become glorious by being transformed to His goal of glory. God is shaping you, and the sacrifice is worth it. So do the work to become glorious. It's a sign of God's love for you. That work, that effort that you put into it is worth it. Because God loves us. God loves us.
Thanks for joining our worship service today. Please follow us on our Facebook page where you can let us know about any needs or prayer requests you may have and keep up with the latest church news and events. You can also check out our past lessons and other videos by visiting our YouTube channel. At First Christian, we strive to be the presence of Christ in the world by helping others to believe in God's love for them, to belong to His church, and to become like Christ in their lives. If you would like to support us in our ministry, you may do so by giving online through our website at fcct.org or by mailing checks to the church. Hey, have a great week.